Hello and welcome back to the Endeavors AI podcast. I'm Collin McKee, the show's host, and today I'm joined by a guest that we quickly realized that both he and I were nearly neighbors. William Franchi is in Tampa and I'm in St. Petersburg. William runs Franchi Law, a personal injury and DUI defense firm that has quietly become one of the more thoughtfully built small firms in this market. Before he was an attorney, he spent 6 years as a law enforcement deputy. Before that, he came down to play ball at UT and just never left. William, it's good to have you.
Great to be on. I appreciate you having me on, and looking forward to this.
So give the audience the quick version. Personal injury and DUI, what does Franchi Law do and who do you serve?
So, we really serve, really all of Florida for personal injury, and then for DUI, the entire Tampa Bay area. COVID's one of those things that made serving the whole state for PI really very simple. We were kind of set up for that. We were ahead of the curve in terms of the audio, video, technology side. And then once COVID happened and everybody went to Zoom, it was a real easy transition. DUI is in court for the most part, in person, right? So we limit that to the Tampa Bay area.
Makes sense. And then you spent 6 years as a deputy before you stepped into the courtroom as a lawyer, and then you went to law school while you were still on the job with no intention of leaving. Walk us through how that transition happened and what it taught you that maybe a straight from law school attorney would miss.
Sure, absolutely. And the kind of rationale behind it started with my undergrad at University of Tampa, and actually I started at Western Carolina before that. And somewhere that my first couple weeks at University of Tampa, through my first bullpen, and blew out my elbow. Right, tried to rehab it, ended up having Tommy John, and going through that process of rehab, and then injuring it again during the rehab process. So this was 20 years ago, right? So the Tommy John surgery 20 years ago was really similar to what they do now, but not as refined as the way it is now. So that kind of set the stage for me to go from playing baseball, and my entire intent was to have a career in baseball, right? Whether it was playing or coaching, that was it. That was all I knew. That's what I was doing, right? And then the injury kind of set it up where I went, I need to get a real job, right? I can't just work in baseball, partially because I had no interest in it at that point with it. The injury was one of those things, by the time I heard it the second time, and it's a year-long rehab, that I was just done. I was, let's move on, let's do something else. And to go even into the more rambling answer of I took the experience that I had playing ball as a deputy and went, I need to have a backup plan, right? Because I didn't have a backup plan coming out of undergrad, coming out of a career in baseball, and went, hey, I should get an upper level degree, right? Because for most things, just the undergraduate degree it is good but not great type of thing. And I looked at going into business school. University of Tampa has a great business school, so I looked at that, and I was missing some prerequisites in math for that. So the old lawyer joke of like, well, I'm bad at math, so I went to law school type of thing, that was entirely true, because I at that point in my life, I'm in the middle, 3 years into a law enforcement career, which actually I was on your side of the bay. I started off in Pinellas County for my first 3 years. And, I looked at it and went, well, I'm not going to go back to undergrad to take the couple of math courses that I would need, especially because I'm looking at it as this is just a backup plan. If something happens, if I get hurt, any number of things, I have something to fall back on, and I have something that I can go do type of thing. So that's where law school fit in, because the math that I had taken was sufficient enough. And so literally like a week after making the decision, I sit down, take the LSATs, and get into Stetson. And so, I went to school. Stetson actually was great. They let me do part-time program. I went to classes with the full-time students during the day, which part-time usually goes at night. And then I worked midnight shift at Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, which they were great too. And the major that allowed me to do that is still a good friend of mine to this day. But they don't typically allow you, as you're going through training, to stay on midnight shift the whole time. They like you moving around in through the different shifts. And I said, hey, look, going to law school, can I just stay on midnight shift? I don't think anybody's actually ever asked just to stay on midnight shift. So, he said yes. And that allowed kind of the path to where we get to, where then a couple years later, I get hurt. I'm chasing a guy. I worked in high drug neighborhoods, chasing a guy, step in the storm drain, tear up my hip, have hip surgery. And, I wasn't really, I come back and go, I'm trying to jump fences. I'm trying to chase these guys. I'm trying to sit in a car for 12 hours a day. And it just didn't work out type of thing. I just go, why am I doing this? I have this law degree and I'm just about done. Why put myself through this? So that's how I ended up going from baseball to law enforcement to the legal field.
Makes sense. And then being on that midnight shift, you probably saw loads of DUI cases because that's when that sort of thing happens. So seeing it from the officer's side, what does that actually change? So you've seen so many DUIs from the law enforcement side before stepping into a courtroom. How does that change for a perspective for an attorney?
Yeah. So I mean, the things that they show you, they're easy to learn, right? They're easy to learn from a book perspective, right? Like I could teach you how to put somebody through field sobriety, and in law enforcement they call it field sobriety exercises. They don't want to call it a test, right? It's too formal calling it a test, but we like to call it a test on our side because we're testing you. I could teach you what to look for and all those different things, but the little nuances of it, what's really important? What does this indicator in the field sobriety test really mean? Is it a big deal? Is it not a big deal? Right. And, from looking at different things and talking to the clients, and they, sometimes they'll go, well, this was my BAC. This was my breath alcohol content. That when they go, someone will say, well, what did you blow? Right. And they'll go, oh, well, it was a 0.08 or is 0.16. Right. I start to have this understanding of, I know what that looks like in real life. I know what, and obviously there's going to be some variances, right? There are some people who, especially people who drink a lot, right? Think kind of alcoholics, if you will, that 0.16 for them may look more normal and baseline than someone who doesn't really drink, right? So there are going to be those differences, but I can start to understand even beyond the exercises, right? So law enforcement can use the video that they have from the beginning of the stop all the way till they hand you off to central booking, right? So I can start to make some, I guess, assumptions, and assumptions are generally bad, but a lot of times when we're having that initial phone call with the client, all we can work off of is assumptions, right? And I can go, hey, this is what I expect it to look like. So this is what we can start to build and understand what our outcome is kind of driving towards now, because there's like a 6 or 8 week gap before we ever get any discovery, any evidence from the other side. So it was really important to be able to use those tools, to be able to talk to a client and go, look, I understand those field sobriety exercises. I understand. I can tell you that because on a walk and turn test, which is the first test that they do, the first official test, they do a eye test first where they test your eyes back and forth. That can usually get thrown out because, not to bore you, but you have to be a drug recognition expert for that to suffice. Everybody does it. Pinellas always taught us to do it off camera, right? So that way it really couldn't be used as evidence, but we used it because you can really the guys who were good at it could pinpoint a breath alcohol content from that. I was okay at it. I wouldn't say I was an expert at, that level of scrutiny on it, but like you could tell if someone missed numbers in the walk and turn, you got to count to 9 and turn around and walk back. That's a big deal. All right. I can tell you, sure, as I sit here today, I've never seen in real life and I've never seen on video anybody do the turn correctly in the walk and turn test. So I look at that and go, well, you're going to have done the turn wrong. So that's going to be one indicator. We know that, right? They only need 2. So if I know that we're going to have 1 built in already, and I look at it and go, hey, to me, that's not a big deal. And I can explain that to these state attorneys who are generally brand new, right? The state attorneys who are working on these DUI cases are usually fresh out of law school and new into the state attorney's office. It's one of those positions where seniority rules, right? So you start out on the bottom of the totem pole, which is misdemeanors and DUI. And then when someone leaves, the longest person moves up type of thing. So that's where that experience really comes into play, and knowing and understanding what it looks like to be that decision maker of who gets arrested for DUI.
Yeah. I'm sure that's an eye opener just for our audience during this podcast. I never knew that you guys got a gimme 1 out of 2. That's definitely the odds are stacked against you. But
yeah,
anyway.
I mean, it's just so all of people go, well, I did great on the field sobriety test, and I kind of go, okay, yeah, let's look at the video, because if you raise your arms, it's an indicator. If you step off the line, right, whether you step off the line 2 inches or 2 feet, it counts the same, right? At least on paper. To me, that's where the importance of having a lawyer come in and go, look, it's an inch wide line.
Right.
He missed it by an inch. Are we really going to say that's a big deal? Are we really saying that person's impaired versus the person who falls over when they're doing it?
Yep. And having your perspective truly helps. So to make a little pivot, our first discussion, we kind of got into tort reform, which I think that's a topic that a lot of people might help from learning about. Maybe they know something about it, maybe they don't. But you were watching it pretty closely in 2023, thinking that it was going to, kind of gut half of your practice in personal injury with what the legislation would come to bear with, and that didn't actually happen. So, can you walk us through? What was anticipated to happen and what actually happened with tort reform?
Sure, absolutely. And at that time, we were actually 100% injury. I would have DUI cases here and there. We didn't market for DUI cases. It would be more of prior clients, friends of friends, acquaintances, that type of thing. And we actually had injury in our name at that time. We were Franchi Injury Law.
Okay.
And as I'm watching tort reform, on a personal level, I had a lot going on in my life at that time. So I have people texting me going, "Hey, do you see this?" I'm like, "No, I have no idea because I have this big personal thing going on and dealing with that." Then that gets settled, and I start looking at it going, "Oh man!" And mind you, this whole thing started and was passed in a 6-week period. Not only passed but enacted in a 6-week period, which is unheard of for really any government action to do anything in a 6-week period, beginning to end type of thing. So I really started focusing on it about 2 or 3 weeks into the process of this new bill. And yeah, the first iterations of it were scary in terms of for personal injury. It was looking like it was going to gut personal injury. It was going to impact how we could do anything with medical bills. I think actually there was potential on caps for damages, which would have been real problematic. And I believe the cap was really low. So there was a lot of pieces that you looked at and go, I might not be able to sustain an injury practice beyond this, right? And so that's when we started looking at DUI, right? And going, what do I know how to do? What have I always done? And how do we expand it, right? So that's where that kind of came into play. But as far as what tort reform actually, how it actually shakes out, for us, I think it benefited firms like mine, who I've tried cases, I've tried personal injury cases, I've tried criminal cases, right? I think anybody who has tried cases and done a lot in litigation, and I have throughout my entire career been heavily involved in litigation, that it helped us, right? Because all of a sudden, these insurance adjusters are emboldened by the way this new law is written in terms of how we can present medical bills, right? Well, the reality is, right, for the average Joe who's listening and is in a car accident, for them, it's really no different than it was before, right? We can still show what their doctors are billing them. The only change really becomes the defense can show what Medicare, Medicaid, or health insurance would have paid for it, right? But that's something that is able to be discussed. That is something that we're able to go, hey, these doctors are cash pay doctors. They don't take that insurance, so it really doesn't matter. This person isn't eligible for Medicare or Medicaid, so that's kind of a misplaced type of thing. And the reality is, and because we've tried this, health insurance won't give us the information, right? We could give them all the coding. They won't tell us what they would pay. And I think a lot of that comes to, they don't pay all the doctors the same, right? So they may pay one doctor one amount for one billing code and another doctor another amount. So, and they don't want the doctors knowing that Dr. A is getting more than Dr. B type of thing. So, it has really created a big old nothing in terms of changes for us when we talk about that, other than we put more cases into litigation. The only other real change is we went from a 4-year statute of limitations to a 2-year statute of limitations, which, in more layman's terms means that if someone wants to file a lawsuit, if insurance won't fairly settle their case without litigation, right, without a lawsuit, without a trial, that type of thing, then we have 2 years to file on it versus 4, which, the intent of the tort reform was to cut down on litigation and everything they did. And I think, kind of this is a byproduct. And I think the defense attorneys that I would talk to, especially right after it was passed, created this scenario where we went, we don't really know what to do with this. Like, this is a mess. No one really consulted anybody on either side that's an actual personal injury lawyer, either plaintiff or a defense lawyer. And we look at it and go, none of this makes sense. None of this makes sense to us. It doesn't actually achieve the goals that they wanted to achieve. It's created more litigation, right? Because when you have a shorter time to file, we file 6 months before the statute of limitations. That's our general practice and procedure. And a lot of times, those cases a year and a half in, especially the bigger ones, right? The person's still treating because they had major injuries. And a lot of times the bigger the crash and the more the injuries that the person has, the doctors will go, okay, we have to address this injury first, let this thing settle out, right? And then we can address this injury here and kind of go down the line in terms of severity. So, for us as a firm and from the business perspective, it's great. Like having more cases in litigation is great for us as a business. It's great for the clients as well because, historically, and this has continued to hold true even with tort reform, the resolutions are higher in litigation than they are in pre-litigation. So clients benefit, we benefit, and the insurance companies are still paying out like they used to, and hasn't really changed much of that.
Right. And so it set out to lower the amount of litigation. It kind of did the reverse. And for the firms that were capable of litigating, they actually benefited from it. You even said that you wound up with more cases after tort reform than beforehand, right?
Yeah, that's correct. We absolutely have. And we've been now on that trajectory for about 18 months now of just a steady increase in cases. And I mean, I talk to other lawyers and, I guess we're blessed with the fact that our case volume keeps going up because a lot of other attorneys that I talk to say theirs is going down type of thing.
Great.
So,
So, kind of switching to the business side of the law practice, you'd mentioned that with personal injury cases, your time frame for getting paid is maybe a 9 to 18-month window, and that DUI kind of fits in. Well, tell us how that fits into it, because that's, to wait 18 months to get paid on something is a long time for anyone. So how does the DUI practice help supplement that?
yeah, so that's been honestly the best part of it, and I think sometimes and I don't mean it to sound slimy, right? We're talking about the business side of it, and so
Right.
I don't want it to sound slimy to clients type of thing. But at the end of the day, we're a business. We sell something. We just happen to sell our know-how, right, and our brains, if, essentially, right, and our experience and all that. So what it does is, so you're right. You're taking a case that you get in, and you're spending the money on marketing, before that case comes in, right? So negative time. And then that personal injury case comes in. And you're right. You have that 9 to 18 months that you're sitting there holding it out. Actually, you're paying out more and more money because we're filing lawsuits. We're paying for depositions. We're paying for experts. We're doing all of those things along the way, right? DUI fits in really nicely because, and in a perfect world, every DUI client would pay us in full all at once, right? But what I have found over the last few years is that most people who get DUIs, and I think most people who end up in a criminal case, maybe absent your high-end white-collar criminals who have big-time jobs that they can afford to shell out thousands of dollars. Most of the regular people who go in and get a DUI can't go, hey, here's $5,000 or $6,000 cash up front. So we do payment plans on it, and I think we do some of the most friendly payment plans to clients because we let them pay over 6 months. We do a down payment and let them pay over 6 months. And when you figure that, and like I said, this is purely from looking at it from the business side of things, right? It is, we'll sign 9 to 10 DUI cases a month. Our down payment is $750, right? So that's an influx of cash flow into the business of 10 times $750, each month. Then we have all of the payment plans that, depending on the cost of the fee, right, depending on the severity of the case, it will determine what the fee is. Then we have all those payment plans. So what the DUI side does is it has this cash flow that comes in every single month that really starts from day one when it comes in and continues for the next 6 months.
It's great. Yeah, it's exactly what you want. And if you're looking at it as, say, the VP of costs for a business, you want monthly revenue and your larger chunks coming in from time to time. So that's I applaud you on the way that you set that up. And there's nothing slimy about running a business. People need your services, and you need to keep the lights on. So
That's true. Yeah.
complementary revenue streams make a whole lot of sense. So switching now to kind of the AI topic that we discussed. AI is all over everything, and in my opinion, probably too much enthusiasm in certain instances. But let's get to the practical piece of it. 13 years ago, for personal injury, you were going through physical papers and what you call red wells. Walk me through what the medical record review process looks like now that AI is involved, and where is there a line between being useful and being dangerous?
Sure. And I think really to understand how AI fits, got to kind of also look at, though, what did it look like before, right? And so sometimes these cases will have 1,000 pages of medical records, right? And so we're looking through, and you know what? at that time I was working for a firm, I'd have between 100 and 150 cases at any one time, right? And for personal injury, on the plaintiff side of personal injury, the goal is speed, right? The more time you spend on a case, the less you make per hour on the case, right? Whereas on the defense side, they go, how much time can I spend on this case? Because the more time I spend on this case, the more money I make on this case, type of thing, right? So they kind of work inverse of each other. But when you look at it and go, well, I had to comb through 1,000 pages of records. And really out of those 1,000 pages, there's maybe 25 pages that really have the culmination of everything. It's kind of like a football game, right? Where it's on for 3 hours, but when they break it down, it's like 20 minutes of actual game time type of thing. Kind of similar to that, right? Where you have all these pages, but break it down, there's I think 20 pages of actual information is probably a lot. It may actually even be a little less. You had to get really good at being able to skim it, pull out the real important stuff, and hope that you didn't miss anything, right? Now with AI, it's great because I can look through the records myself, right? Which I do. But now with AI, I can have it go, okay, let's summarize this. Let me have an understanding of what these records are saying. And then I can also go, tell me where a knee injury is found. So especially, I think this even becomes even more important when we're talking about prior records. I recently had a client had some chronic diseases, right? Lifetime chronic diseases. And I needed to be able to show a contrast between those and the current one. So I went, these are the injuries I have from this case, from our actual current case. And I think I had 2,000 or 3,000 pages of prior medical records, loaded them all up into AI. And I said, tell me every time this body part shows up. And it gave me a list. And with the systems that we use, not only will it give me the list of every time it shows up, but it'll give me essentially like a footnote, right? It'll give me a little link that I can click on and then go, okay, so if it's the left foot, let's say, right? I'm looking for that. And I see on my AI summary, okay, here's left foot here, 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 and here. It'll give me a little link that I can click on and go, okay, here, it says left foot. It'll actually pull up that record and I can look at what it actually said about that left foot. Now that record itself may be 10 or 15 pages long, but I don't need those other pages because what I needed was right there and I can see it and it streamlines it so much. I mean, it would take me it used to take me an entire day. Let's say I was getting ready for a mediation. It would take me a full day at minimum to go through all the records, know what was going on with it, and know what arguments I need to make. I can do that on a really complicated medical case now, 2 to 3 hours max.
Nice. It's good return of time. So in the good, bad, and ugly, getting to a little bit of the ugly, you had mentioned that there was a bicycle case where AI had hallucinated and said the injuries were on the left when they were supposed to be on the right or vice versa. So if that were to happen and you don't catch that mistake, what kind of cost is that to your firm?
I don't know if you can really pinpoint an exact cost. I think some of that cost is more in the, can you really be trusted, right? And I don't know if there's really a way to calculate that type of thing. I think that really highlights the importance of, you can't fully trust AI 100%. You know, what's the saying? Trust and verify, or trust but verify type of thing. And that bicycle case that you mentioned was a perfect example. And this was a few years ago. And we actually use that same AI now. Again, we stopped using it. And then this company came back and went, hey, we've revamped it. It's a whole lot better. And it actually is. The problem before was they didn't have that way to verify. They didn't have that link to go, here's what we pulled. Here's where we pulled it from, type of thing. And it just so happened that I was so intricately involved in that one particular case that I knew that client's injuries were all on one side of the body. And yet that when I got the AI results back summarizing, and this was another one, 1,000+ pages of medical records, major type of crash. And I look at it and go, it has injuries on both sides of the body. And I go, well, I know that's not right. So then I'm going back through reading all the medical records going, how did I miss that there was injuries on both sides of the body, right? You start to doubt yourself and what you actually thought you knew about the case. And you come to realize after spending that time of verifying what AI has told you that, no, actually you knew what you were talking about. AI didn't know what it was talking about. So it's still very important. I had an attorney and and that attorney's no longer here. Not because of this. I think that person learned their lesson. I think it was a hard lesson for them to learn, with a judge, but our policies and procedures in terms of the use of AI says that if you use it and it has case law, 'cause we use a legal product that ties into case law as well, which is great. A lot of great uses for that, right? But in this one instance, this person used one, the case didn't actually exist. I went, you didn't take the 2 seconds. Like, A, our policies say that you have to do that. And B, well, the judge really came down. I'm like, good. Like that, did you learn your lesson? Right? Did you learn that we're never going to do that again? Type of thing. So yeah, it can be bad, but it can also work wonders.
Right.
It really can. It really streamlines some of the time. I mean, I've used it for, here's I guess a pretty good example. We have, we, as a business owner, we have lots of contracts with lots of vendors, and, we had a vendor that they had breached the contract, but I didn't want to make a big deal about it. Right. So I just went into our legal AI system and said, hey, these are the main points that I need to hit, right, in terms of the breach, but draft me something that's really softly worded, that's really polite, professional, but polite and soft and not trying to be a jerk about this. And, it produced very well thought out, because it's one of those things I go, do I really want to spend an hour drafting a breach letter for a vendor, right? When I can do other things. So it worked wonders. It was really well written, really soft, really polite, hit all the points. So it definitely has its places.
Yep. You don't say this expressly, but obviously you took the time to read over it before hitting send, right? At least
yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, and that's the thing, right? Like, and I'll use it. Here's another great example. I do mediation briefs and arbitration briefs on anytime I'm arbitrating or mediating a case. I'll start with going, hey, AI, here's a previous mediation brief that I did. Here's the medical records and the police report from this case. Draft for me a mediation brief, right? And I then use that as a starting point, right? Because anytime you're writing something, the hardest part is the start, right? But like you said, I don't just take that and go, okay, it's done. Here you go. To me, it's a framework. It's an outline. It takes it from taking me 4 hours to draft that to maybe an hour and a half to go through it, make sure all the points are in there, make sure it's worded how I want it worded. So, it may not sound like me. So I'm going to make it sound like me and use my words and my, everything that I would do with it.
One other point before wrapping up is kind of the stigma, especially on personal injury and DUI defense attorneys. I mean, there's a stigma there. I don't think it's fair, but it is very real. You see it in social media, kind of laughed at. But what do you wish people actually understood more about what you do?
Sure, yeah. I mean, with all of our following on social media, I know that stigma very well. I'd say the first thing, I've never chased an ambulance in my life. I've never actually physically chased an ambulance. So that's number one.
There you go.
But, the reality is, right, everybody has a job to do. And I say this sometimes, and I don't know if it comes off as hokey or not, but if the insurance companies just treated people fairly when it came to taking care of people's injuries for car crashes, I wouldn't have a job. Like not that I wouldn't have a job, right? As an attorney, there's many other things I could do. I wouldn't have a job in personal injury. Plaintiff personal injury lawyers wouldn't exist if people's injuries were treated fairly by the insurance companies, right? So I think people just assume that all of our clients are out to make a quick buck, right? And they're not really hurt. And how could they possibly be hurt from a car crash type of thing? And the reality is, people are really hurt. Now, can I sit here and say that, 100% of my clients are, not exaggerating? Is there some small percentage of clients who may be exaggerating their injuries? Maybe, but how do I know which ones those are, right? Because they all have verifiable injuries per the doctors, and the doctors say that these injuries exist, right? And if the doctor's telling me the injury exists, then great. We're going with that because that's what the doctor says, So, I think the stigma is a little misplaced, especially on the personal injury side, because, it really impacts people's lives and to different degrees. Sometimes it's the injuries that impact their lives greatly. And sometimes it's the fact that they need a car to get to work and they don't have the means to go rent a car. Right. So now they're going, well, how do I get to my job when I can't afford an Uber and I can't afford a rental car? And, so it creates all of these things and it creates all of these kind of real life issues for them. On the criminal side, maybe the stigma isn't quite as misplaced, right? Look, there are some bad people out there, but there's also cases that we won't take, right? Because I don't want to defend every type of criminal type of thing, right? But, when it comes, especially with DUI, right? A lot of times it's just regular Joe who just made a mistake, they drank too much, and we handle a lot of first-time DUIs, right? We see by and large, highest percentage by far is first-time DUI, no crash, they just got pulled over, right? So, to me, that's a lot lesser on the scale of than someone who's on their fifth DUI, caused a major crash, right? And essentially, these people they need a break. They need a do-over, right? And that's what we're here trying to do is get them that. How do we get through this time, right? They've learned their lesson. They're not hardcore alcoholics. This is hopefully for them, a one-time issue and not, a major issue into the future. And then, compound that. And I don't want to speak poorly about law enforcement, especially having been in law enforcement, but, I've seen reports that I look at and go, really? Are you kidding me? Like, A, you stopped the person for that, or B, like, that was what you went with for a DUI. It's just so weak. And then the person blows and they blow under 0.08. And you go, see, like, you shouldn't have stretched that one type of thing. Or, look, with what I had done and working in high drug areas, we stopped a lot of cars. We did a lot of traffic stops. You don't have to stop somebody for a weak reason. You can get a good reason
Right.
if you follow a car for just a minute or two. Like it's not really all that hard, right? So it's kind of that protection from the system, if you will, the protection from and making sure that law enforcement is doing their job the right way, which quite frankly, I hope that they are. I hope that, I tried to do things the right way as a deputy, right? And especially when it came to searching people, searching cars, all of those things. On this side of the fence, I try to do things the right way, right? And I think that's the biggest thing. And that's why for me, I think the stigma really shouldn't exist, because I'm just out here trying to be a good guy, do the right things, treat people fairly, and try to avoid whenever I see an ambulance drive by my office on Kennedy Boulevard, running out and following it to wherever it's going.
Fight the urge.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, that really bodes to your credibility. You've been on both sides of the fence. You've listened to both sides. That's excellent. So, kind of to wrap it, I'd like to ask about the future, where honestly, looking 2 months in advance, it gets more difficult nowadays because just the advancements and the speed at which AI is coming into all of our lives. But 13 years ago, you were going through physical paper trails. If you could look out, say 3 to 5 years, how does a well-run PI and DUI firm have a real advantage when it comes to using AI? What sort of things do you see coming down the pike in law that AI is going to be a non-negotiable for a successful firm?
Yeah. So I think we're really close to being there, right? I think we're really close to maxing out, at least in this area of law or these two areas of law, what you can really do with AI, right? And I think it's more of a, how do we make it better? How do we streamline these things, or how do we make the AI systems better to make the timelines better, the summaries better for medical records, those types of things. I don't see how you could really make it applicable to a DUI case, right? I mean, maybe if there was some way to have it analyze the video and do a deep dive, but at the end of the day, you're looking at presenting it to a jury. So
Right.
do I really care what a computer model says about what these field sobriety and video looks like versus what do my eyes see? What do I expect the person who hasn't been trained? I think that's as we're talking about DUIs before, kind of missed the point of my experience is one thing, right? And other attorneys' experience is one thing as well. But when you're presenting it to a jury, they don't have any experience. The only experience they have, and I think for the most part, all of us have been around somebody who's been drunk, maybe lots of people who have been drunk. So we know what that looks like,
Mhm.
right? And so it's, I think, more of a, what does that person look like on video, right? To a person, not a computer. So, I don't necessarily know how AI really fits into that. I'll tell you where I think, at least for us and our firm, and something that I just started thinking about yesterday of all things, was we get all these documents in, right? We get emails, documents, everything else. And how do we streamline getting that from it's on paper, like it comes in the mail, for example, right? How do we get that from being on paper to in the client's file as streamlined as possible, right? Like right now we have a pretty good process, but there's still a lot of manual aspect to it. I know, some of these things, there's always going to be a manual aspect, right? I don't AI and I guess until we have robots can't scan that paper mail
Right.
that the postman delivers, right? So at minimum, we'll have to scan it in. But I started going, hey, is there a way that I can take this paper mail just scan it in and have an AI system go, it goes to this case and it's from this provider or this vendor or this whatever, right? This insurance company. And the title of it should be X, right? To me, I think that's the next biggest step, right? In addition to, really kind of making better the kind of medical records and, knowing what you're missing. That's one of the other big uses that we'll use it for is we'll put the records in and go, what am I missing, right? Some of them will even start to give us a evaluation of cases, right? And that may be a next step, right? How do we take that system, upload everything to it and go, hey, AI, what do you think the value of this case is, right? And that's not to take away from our experience. I think if you look at what I've read about the medical field, right, and how doctors are using AI, right? It's not to replace the doctor, right? But this one doctor may have seen this one set of symptoms one time, right? Whereas another doctor may have seen it 5 and another doctor may have seen it 15. And all of a sudden you're putting all of this data in and you're going, hey, these are what my symptoms are. And they're odd symptoms, let's say, right? It's not an obvious like, oh, it's a cold or it's a flu or something like that. And it's spitting out and going, well, it could be this. Okay, well, not real familiar with that, right? Because maybe that's just not something I've seen, right? So, I think you can kind of create the same thing from the legal side and go, hey, I have all of these records. I have all of these prior medical records. Here are my facts of the crash. Here's my property damage. Here's all these things, right? What does past data show us? Honestly, I think that's probably real similar to what the insurance companies have been using for years, where they use Colossus is one of the trade names that it goes by, that they upload everything and they go, what's the value of this? And then they don't go above that until you get into litigation, right? They juke the system. Like that's the problem with theirs is they only put in stuff that doesn't go into litigation. Stuff that goes into litigation doesn't get pumped into that. At least that's my understanding of it. But that's where I could see AI being really beneficial for us as well to give us that. And it gives us kind of a gut check too of, am I overvaluing this case? Am I undervaluing this case? There's just lots of factors that can go in.
Yep. Yep. I mean, do the calculative work, the busy work, the repetitive work. It's not going to replace you and it's not going to replace your team. To your point on a DUI case, someone needs someone to talk to. It's not going to replace an attorney, but it will give you the time to focus on the things that you do best and the things that people are looking to you to do. So that's awesome. Well, William, I really appreciate it. This is exactly the honest conversation that small firms need to hear. And also those looking for, personal injury and DUI attorneys. So where can people find you? What's the best way to find Franchi Law?
Yeah. So first way is you can find me on Instagram and Facebook. Instagram's at the Lawfather Tampa, and Facebook is at the Lawfather. TikTok also at the Lawfather. YouTube. So I guess all the places and some variation of at the Lawfather. I think Instagram's the only one that we had to add Tampa to it.
Okay.
We own the trademark, but Instagram doesn't seem to care that we own the trademark to it. So that's that. And then franchilaw.com, FRANCHI law.com is our website. But there's probably more fun and informative stuff on our social media. Not to get off on that tangent, but it's definitely try to keep it fun and interesting. It's not the boring lawyer channel that most of them are. So
awesome. Cool. And we'll put a couple links in the show notes as well. And for any managing partners that are listening right now, if you're curious about where AI fits into your practice, start with operational clarity before you touch a single tool and know what you're getting into and be cautious with it. And we will see you on the next show.